G'day, welcome to the Australian Property Podcast. I'm Pete Wargent from AllenWargent Property Buyers. This is our weekly 2 cent segment where we talk about the big three property news stories of the week and what else is going on in the world of real estate. I'm here with Chris Bates from the Alcove Group Mortgage Specialists. Christoph, how's your week been?
Mate, doing well. We ended up going camping down Canberra on the weekend at a friend's farm in Queanbeyan. Absolutely freezing, camped in like 1 degree temperatures.
I could have told you that. Quangers at this time of year, it's going to be freezing.
Absolutely. The first night was not too bad. Second night, literally the car was frozen over and I was surprised I survived. But great day, proper shindig, bush bash, I guess you call it. We were eating venison off the farm, kangaroo curries, planting trees, swimming in the dam. Like it was... They were doing line dancing. It was definitely an experience for the kids. So, that was good fun. And this weekend, going to check out Vivid, play football, and my dad's up from Melbourne. So what's news in your world, mate?
I've seen a few of those Vivid pictures. I haven't been for quite a few years, actually, but it looks pretty spectacular, as it always did. What's happening? We're pretty busy, actually, funnily enough. Just last 2 or 3 weeks, I'd say we're pretty near to full capacity now, but more so with home buyers now as much as investors, particularly in the cities. That's been a bit of a surprise. I think historically when interest rates fall, you get investors sort of surging back into the market, but it's really home buyers that have been inquiring with us a lot, and a few commercial property investors as well. I've been over in UK this week, just catching up with a few Aussie mates. It's the international... what do they call it? The ICC Test Championship, something or other, Lords next week. So I've got a few Aussie mates, actually from down the way that you've been this week, from Albury and that part of the world. Just catching up with a few Aussie mates who are doing the sightseeing thing this week, and actually jumped on to get my Ashes tickets this week. So it's an absolute shit fight. There was nearly 250,000 tickets sold on day one. So I've got a real mixed bag of tickets. I've got some day 3 tickets here and day 4 there, but it's really competitive. So obviously a big summer of sport ahead. Have you guys got busier since the rate cuts and since the election? It seems to be the vibe.
Yeah, look, I don't like to talk it up unless I can actually see the data right and actually see actual applications from clients. And we were doing a lot of strategies earlier in the year, but a lot of people were just sitting on their hands, just saying, look, I just want to see what's happening. I want to see what happens to the election. I want to see the rate cuts. But in the last 3 weeks, this is week number 3, we've definitely had more applications than we have had for the last couple of years. It's been very, very busy for our applications team and lodging. And, a typical similar number of people coming to us. I would say it's slightly, but it's a lot of those sort of older strategies, people who've been sitting on their hands, just watching, have gone, hang on a sec, double rate cut. Let's take some action now. Let's get ready. But be one of the stories we talk about today. It's winter, right? You can see I'm rugged up. I've actually got the heater on for the first time in my office. And it's not really a great time to be listing your property, particularly now as school holidays are going to quickly creep up on people. And so really June, July, usually the months where our clients are sort of getting ready, getting the pre-approval in the drawer, ready to sort of take advantage as listings pick up in spring. But I imagine you're sort of similar, Pete, as people are coming to you with new briefs, but you sort of got to be realistic with them and say, look, it's very little new properties are going to come on for the next month or two.
It is. And also a lot of people take their leave in real estate at this time of year. So some of our team, but also some of the real estate agents, it's a bit different from some other industries. So, I guess there's less stock available, fewer listings, fewer auctions at this time of year. So, there's a bit of a dearth of supply out there. I think, there's a few sort of other factors. I just think housing supply in general has been really tight. I saw the Fin Review did a piece that we can link to about how tight lending has, in effect, worsened the housing shortage. I think we've had some developer clients over the last 2 or 3 years who would love to develop, but it's really hard to get conventional financing. And then if they go outside of the mainstream lenders, they have to pay an extremely high mortgage rate. So there's a lot of supply that hasn't come online as lending standards have tightened up. I think if you look closely at the latest rental vacancy figures from Cotality, they're pretty much back to historic lows all around the country. So, as you said, it's not actually a busy time of year, this typically, but even still, rental vacancy rates are very, very tight. And there's shortages of public housing, shortages of properties for sale. You can see in the financing figures, there's been a surge of renovations activity, I think, as people have just decided to stay put because they probably can't find places to upgrade to. So, yeah, I think it's just generally this time of year, just not that much stock, I suppose. So, yeah, it's interesting to see people going back to mortgages. One thing I did get this week, and it's been a while between drinks, was an email from a bank saying if you'd like to lower your home loan repayment, please go ahead, which is kind of interesting because it's not the same in Australia as some other countries. Here, quite often when interest rates fall, and it's been a while since we've been able to talk about that, often the repayments can continue on the same trajectory and people build up repayment buffers. So in some other countries, you'd automatically just get a lower payment. But here, sometimes lenders get you to opt in. So I think it's probably not a bad thing in the system. It just helps with people getting ahead on their repayments a bit and just, I suppose, builds up a bit of a buffer against financial stress.
I mean, we've definitely seen a bit of a retention pricing war. It's almost every day I'm chatting to the strategy team and they're sort of whinging it, which is probably not the right word, but it's very English of us. But basically just complaining that the banks are, it's really short-sighted the way they're going about it is, clients will get all their documents, will go to their bank and say, hey, can you give them a better deal? They say no. We'll lodge an application. We'll get formal approval at a different bank. We'll, lodge the discharge request. It's all ready to go. And then the bank will sort of come in, drop their pants and give a huge discount and throw the kitchen sink at them. And you're like, hang on a sec. We can't even get that market, that rate in the market right now for new customers. And it's, extremely well priced. And we're seeing a real fight at the real last minute by banks in retention teams. And I don't think it really wins customers over. Customers know that they've had to do a lot of work to get themselves a better deal, and they shouldn't have to have gone through that. And while they might stay now, I don't think it builds customer loyalty. So, however, I do think that a natural war starts in the retention teams and then moves to the new to business teams. And as rate cuts happen, I think banks are going to say, hang on a sec, we've maybe given too many, great deals for our existing customers here. We've sort of overpriced them, I guess. And what we're going to do is now start to take advantage of that and just offer better deals to new customers, not existing. And so I see a loyalty tax problem starting to brew as rates come back down. But, yeah, that's interesting. The banks are in. So we crack on with the 3 stories this week, Pete, and our 2 cents.
Let's do that. So this is our weekly 2 cent segment where we go through the big 3 property news stories of the week. But stick around because at the end we'll do some listener Q&A. And as always, send in your questions because we do like to cover some of those to wrap up the segment. So let's start with this first news story of the week. So Cotality put out their latest monthly housing price update, and we don't always cover these in the 2 cents, but it was pretty interesting because I guess there's been a bit of a pivot or a bit of a change of direction in some cities. So we'll do a bit of a look at that. So the latest figures, so Cotality, formerly known as CoreLogic, housing prices showed a synchronised upswing for all capital cities, plus for regional Australia. So it seems as though the growth trends around the country have kind of converged. I think previously it was those medium or mid-sized capital cities like Perth and Brisbane and Adelaide that were absolutely blazing ahead. But now the softer markets like Melbourne and Canberra, although the prices are lower than where they were a year ago, they've returned to grow. So across the month, the capital cities largely recorded pretty similar gains. So 0.4% in Melbourne and Adelaide, 0.5% in Sydney, 0.6% in Brisbane, and 0.7% in Perth. The only real outlier was Darwin, where there's a bit of a mini boom going on of interstate investors that we talked about maybe a couple of weeks ago. Just some anecdotes there. And actually prices are really moving in the Northern Territory. I don't know how long that will last for. I guess that could be a bit of an outlier for this cycle. But I suppose if you look at market pricing, the changes to first home buyer lending, it feels like this cycle is just getting started. We'll probably have lower mortgage rates over the next 12, 15 months. And then from early next year, we'll get the first home buyer deposit scheme and various other demand side measures. So where are you seeing some of the best options for your buyers at the moment, Chris? Any feedback from the people who apply to you?
Look, I think the 5% deposit scheme and the expansion of that coming into January has sort of changed people's perceptions a little bit. They're like, hang on a sec, I think this is going to be massively demand stimulation here, and it's going to bring a lot more buyers into the market. I want to get ahead of that. I don't want to be buying from January onwards. And I've also seen a lot of clients who are looking at investment properties and saying, hang on a sec, I know that's going to be good for prices in terms of pushing prices up. And I also know that I can get some good assets up to those price points now. You know, in Sydney, 1 million, Melbourne, 1 million, Brisbane, 1 million, you know. And so I think, I'm not sure if I said Sydney, 1.5 million, but it's basically investors are saying, hey, why don't I get maybe a low 1 million investment property in Sydney that first home buyers are absolutely going to compete on once this 5% deposit scheme basically kicks in January. And I think that's a smart move, particularly, and also going into the Melbourne and Brisbane housing markets under $1 million would be a smart move as well. So I see that. I also see upgraders have finally been coming back. We've had multiple clients sort of finally make it happen, buy on long settlements, and then list their properties. It's been very stressful trying to find a home and actually secure something, but there wasn't really an urgency for them to try to lock something in. There was always a sort of self-sabotaging thing that I think a lot of upgraders were doing is, well, why would I want to upgrade when interest rates are 6+ and they're likely to stay high? You know, there's no rush. I quite enjoying having a lower mortgage. And then all of a sudden, a couple of rate cuts and they're like, hang on a sec, if we don't do it now, we're going to miss out. And so that would be my take on where we are in the cycle right now.
That was always my concern. We talked about this, I think, during the election campaign, is that if you announce these policies months and months ahead of time, then the advantage just gets arbitraged away by people who can move sooner. So, yeah, I mean, it's not much chop if you get the 5% deposit, but you end up paying more for the privilege because people have beaten you to the post. So, yeah, so I mean, it does seem that there's a risk of that happening over the 6 months or so ahead. And then in the new year, maybe the first home buyers end up paying a bit more. I think, there's some various other policy measures being thrown around in Victoria, potential scrapping of stamp duty, depending on who wins the election. I think that's the direction of travel anyway. It seems that people are piling in. I think, rental vacancy rates, according to CoreLogic, close to historic lows, I guess, all across the country. So that issue hasn't gone away either. I think there's been some jostling in the rental market and people maybe, I guess, just adjusting to higher rents. But the fundamental shortage hasn't gone away. And that's always a dynamic which keeps people pretty on their toes when it comes to buying. But yeah, I think like a lot of buyers agents, although we try to source pre-market and off-market properties, there's not a whole lot of stock at this time of year. So that's another challenge too, really, is not just getting the financing, getting in a position to buy. It's just finding that quality property that you actually want and that fits the bill for you. So pretty challenging. Let's have a look at this second news story of the week. A term I've never heard before, Chris, Stayvestors. I've never heard the terminology before. This is a Fin Review article, but I have seen some clients who do this. I guess the general concept is younger people staying home with parents to save a deposit and then maybe buy a rental, buy an investment property. I guess it's reflective of a housing affordability issue. And I think people see it as a way to maybe sort of game the system a bit and get a toehold on the property ladder. And I guess it's just another one of the many ways in which the housing market evolves over time, especially at a time when rents have gone up so much over the past 5 years. Any sort of pros and cons of that approach from a lending or strategy perspective, do you think?
Look, I haven't actually heard the word before as well. I mean, we've absolutely had lots of clients do this strategy, but, I also got caught out by that word. I was like, hang on a sec, I haven't heard that. And it's actually really true. And it's actually a great word. I mean, rent vesting's been a big, common, conversation. I've literally just published on a post on LinkedIn regarding that. And, and that makes a lot of sense in certain markets, but there's challenges people don't think about. But stay vesting is sort of when you're living at home and you're buying investment property, so you're not paying any rent. there's a few benefits to that. Obviously, your cash flows, and if you buy a property, then there's tax deductions on that for you. And because your cash flows, obviously probably one of the best times in your life when maybe you're not paying board and, you can save a lot more of your money and maybe you're not even paying for food because you're, eating out of the fridge that's always full. But, stay vesting sort of makes a lot of sense for people just getting into the market. And the second benefit is you usually have a higher borrowing capacity, because you're not paying rent. And so instead of buying a home and, having a mortgage that's non-deductible under higher interest rates, buying an investment property and living at home is much better for your cash flow. It means you can build buffers and, get on top of that debt. And we've helped clients do that many, many times for many, many years. And I think it sort of leads into another article that I also flicked to you, Pete, around sort of, people just living at home longer and longer. And I think that it's sort of the multi-generational families and rather than the kids sort of running away at 18 and going and renting something and going to uni, it's just such a big leap for them that, maybe we should just keep living here. And maybe the parents don't want them to leave as well. I mean, yes, there's sometimes people want them to go on their own 2 feet, but, they often grieve when they do leave because it's sort of a change in their life, right? And they don't get to see the kids as much. So what do you think about that, Pete? I think we are moving to this world where multi-generational families stay living together, not just till they're sort of in their early 20s, but even to the point where they're getting married and having kids and, maybe it's a granny flat or maybe they're buying homes together. We've absolutely seen that in the last few years as well.
For sure. This was a Hilda survey from the Melbourne Institute at Melbourne Uni. So as many as 50% of 18 to 29-year-olds are living at home with their parents, according to the latest Hilda survey. And yes, cost of living is obviously a factor, but I think demographers have pointed out that we're practically doing everything later in life than we used to. So more people are taking gap years, so they're graduating later, they're partnering up, marrying much later than people would have done a generation ago, having kids. So like in our case, we, like a lot of people, ended up having kids, but we pushed it right out, into our late 30s, I guess. Almost got down to D-Day. So if we're going to do this, we have to at some point crack on with it. And that seems to be quite common. I think people are choosing to do other things first and then settle down later on. I think that there's some downsides to this. I think anyone who's stayed with parents after the age of 18 would be familiar with that sort of not under my roof type of lecture. So there's some of the intangibles of the downsides. From a financial perspective, as you said, it could be very smart because if you're not paying rent or if you're just paying sort of a notional or nominal rent every fortnight, that's not too bad. I think there was something I observed back in the 90s when I came out to Sydney, because I think one of the differences in United Kingdom and probably other parts of Europe is that it's very common in Europe, when you leave school, if you go to higher education, you pick a city to go and study as far away as possible. It might be, if you live in London, you might go and study in, I don't know, Edinburgh or something, or Newcastle, to get as far away from parents as possible, or maybe go to Barcelona or Portugal or something. Whereas when I came to Sydney, I saw a lot more people staying with parents and doing uni, or going to TAFE and staying with parents, that kind of thing. So maybe that sort of, that break from parents, generally can happen a bit later in Australia, but I guess this is exactly what the survey speaks to, and that's a lot more people are thinking, well, expensive city like Sydney, why not just cash in on staying with parents for a bit longer? And if you can use that to your advantage to save up a deposit, maybe get a toehold on the property ladder, then I suppose why not? But I guess it depends whether you can live with your parents. I couldn't wait to leave.
Yeah, and then I guess it also depends on where you're living, right? I think often people don't factor in the opportunity cost of, when they are living in a capital city and they go, oh, I'll just do a Stayvestor, right? I'll live at home and I'll buy an investment property, regionally, for example. And yeah, I mean, they buy costs, sell costs, LMI, buyer's agent, capital gains tax. And then what they often don't factor in is the opportunity cost of, potentially just buying their future home. And I think that's where a lot of, Stayvestors will get it wrong, is they go for this, borderless investing. They buy a regional hotspot And they just often they want to move out of home and they're like, well, now I've got to sell that investment property to buy something I could live in. When maybe they should have just bought, still Stayvest, but maybe just bought an apartment in the capital city, for example. I do also think this article sort of said, a lot of them have been buying off the plan. And you and I both know, Pete, there's a lot of challenges with that type of investing. And, and potentially, while that might seem like a really good option, a lot of first home buyers are the ones who fall for the spruiking there and basically buy assets that don't go in value. And then they have valuation risks and they basically, waste that opportunity. And so I think whenever you're doing any, whether it's rent vesting or stay vesting, you've got to really focus on making sure it's a really good asset and something that you could ideally live in long term rather than sort of, for example, just picking a regional hotspot.
I think you're right. Let's say you live in Melbourne, you could choose to buy an investment property in Townsville or somewhere else interstate, wherever the next hotspot proves to be, probably Darwin at the moment. But then there's a bit of a hedging thing, isn't there? Like if you're planning to one day live in Melbourne, maybe it's better to get a toehold on the ladder locally, even if it's a cheap apartment or unit. And as you say, if you buy off the plan, well, there's so many more moving parts there. It's more speculative. And I think we'll probably see a number of moves to promote people buying new property over the next couple of years, because, of course, the government wants to try and hit its housing supply targets, which it's currently not doing by a big margin. But yeah, it's a potential trap for a lot of people. And that's not just opinion based. Just look at the stats on the sort of pain and gain reports. The loss on resale for a lot of people is very often where they're bought off the plan and bought new. And when it comes to 3, 5, 10 years down the track, you've got a second-hand apartment, which is probably not worth as much as you had hoped. And yeah, lots that can go wrong, I suppose, if you're buying something out of a brochure that's not built yet. More moving parts in terms of financing, valuation risk, defects, you name it. So yeah, it's going with your eyes wide open if you're going to buy off the plan. But I'd say for the bulk of first home buyers, you're really probably better off buying something established that's already built, because fewer things that can go wrong, I think.
Yeah, absolutely, Pete. Should we crack on with story number 3 here around sort of listing numbers?
Yeah, so this one was just a media release from SQM Research. So listings actually increased in May. I think Louis Christopher, who's the head honcho at SQM, said that maybe vendors got a little bit more confident once the election was out of the way. I think actually, just casting my mind back, we did have a lot of disruption, didn't we? So we had a couple of long weekends from memory. In our part of the world, we had a cyclone. There was a bit of a fizzer for us, but further south, they got walloped. So I think there was probably a bit of a backlog anyway of listings, and sort of like a coiled spring eventually as the election and the long weekends got out of the way. Some people actually listed. It's just diving into some of the stats. A bit of older stock piling up a little bit in Sydney and Melbourne. So maybe price expectations maybe a bit too high on some of that stuff. But I suppose on the other side of the ledger, the number of distressed listings were down about 10% over the year. So I think, as we've sort of talked about over the past year, although, of course, there's been a lot of financial stress around the country as interest rates have gone up, it's largely been reflected in a slowdown in consumption, slowdown in the economy. It hasn't resulted in a surge of mortgage arrears or defaults, at least so far. So, did you have a crack at those numbers, Chris? It just looks like maybe a little burst of listings once the election got out of the road.
Yeah, I mean, we spoke about this in March, that April was always a funny month to list your property because of school holidays, Anzac, Easter, election. I didn't even think about the weather, Pete. That absolutely would have delayed some listings, right? And so May was always going to be a bit of a bounce back, but it's just so short. It was just going to be all of a sudden, if you didn't list it then you weren't going to list it till sort of July, August. And obviously there was some more rate cuts, etc. So it would have made sense. Could you just capture that market where you knew there was going to be low listings on the market and you knew that there'd be a bit more increase in buyer demand? And it probably, if you were going to look to sort of example, transact it later this year and you wanted to sell first or get rid of that investment property, it would have made sense just to sort of maybe try your luck in May, and maybe even take it off the market over sort of June, July and relaunch it in the sort of spring period if you can't sell it. And I think that's what's happened this month is you've seen a bit come on. I mean, old listings sort of accruing. I just think that's because we're not in a FOMO market. Buyers are still picky. They've still got tight borrowing capacity, and they're not going, hang on a sec, if I don't buy now, I'm never going to buy. And so I do think you're going to see naturally properties accruing on the market that are old stock right now, just because buyers aren't completely desperate. However, auction clearance rates have started to increase, and that really is the desperation meter. When that starts getting up about 80% plus, that's everything's selling. No matter how good it is, it's selling under the hammer. And at the moment, it's sort of bounced maybe circa 70% from a bit lower, and that's a sign that there's a bit more heat building in the market, but buyers aren't completely desperate yet.
It seems that way. Just looking at the asking prices that SQM run, a separate set of indices they do for the capital cities. Melbourne, house price asking prices pretty soft, but units were up 5% from a year earlier. Not something that's been seen in Melbourne over the past decade. Actually, the same in Brisbane now. Unit asking prices a bit faster than the house prices, which I'm sure speaks to an affordability issue in Brisbane. More people are getting sort of pushed down the sort of the ladder, I suppose, into townhouses and units. I think still some weakness in Canberra and Hobart over the year. And Darwin that we previously mentioned, house prices, asking prices up 18% from a year earlier. So if you're thinking of jumping into Darwin, well, maybe the bulk of that cycle has already been sort of priced in, I suppose. We did talk a few weeks back about this big rush of interstate investors piling into Darwin as probably, I suppose, the cheapest mainland capital now. I think it is. I don't know. Check the stats. But it's a funny place, Darwin. It's it's more like a regional city than a capital city in a lot of ways because it's quite remote and a bit smaller. So as you said, it feels like we're sort of early stage in the cycle. There's no big FOMO yet, but just anecdotally, I think there's a bit more happening now. I think elections out of the way. I think the RBA released its minutes this week. They're very, very dovish language talking about whether they should have cut 50 basis points. National accounts showing sluggish growth this week. I think that's the general environment. Maybe just a bit more confidence around buyers over the next few months.
Yeah, absolutely, Pete. I think it's just watch this space over the next 2 months with listings. I just looked at the stats here, Pete, as well. It's just crazy just how tight the Brisbane market is. I mean, that's your specialty. If you look at how many listings were on the market, say 2, 3, 4 years ago versus what's on the market now, it's just so tight up there. And much harder to buy properties up there than it was, say, 5, 10 years ago.
I'm sure that's why we're getting so many home buyers. I think people would love to do it themselves, but we've got some briefs where people have a decent budget, but they just can't find the stock. So therefore, they think, well, let's pass that problem on to Pete and the team. But I mean, it's challenging for us sometimes, because people have school zones they want to be in. They've got certain suburbs they want to target. But the number of new listings, as you said, at this time of year, there's not loads coming on. So, with the guys are going to have their work cut out over the remainder of this year. So let's wrap up this week with our listener Q&A. So first question is from Selfie. I'm self-employed. I have been for the past 2 years. What should I do to improve my borrowing capacity? Do I need to show payslips or can I use tax returns? Or Chris, that's a question that's right up your street, so I'll flick that one to you.
Look, it's always changing self-employment borrowing policy in terms of the banks, in terms of how they look at your income. I mean, back in the day, you also always had to have sort of 2 years tax returns, 2 years ABN, and that often land on an average of the 2 years. And things have changed a bit. Often a lot of banks will just look at the last 12 months. Often you still need an ABN for at least 18 months. But they might just do it on 1 year of good financials. The first year is often not great in business. The second year is usually better. And so, you might just be able to lend on the last year. A lot of banks are sort of, back in COVID, that sort of went off the table again. Everyone wanted the averages or the lower year. But at the moment, the last financial year is pretty easy to get through. The second thing is, it also depends if you're paying yourself a salary. And, often banks will just look at that nowadays. If you've been doing that for the last 6 months, some innovation came around that. The big yellow bank sort of brought that in and other banks have followed, etc. So, self-employment lending is is a tricky one. You've really got to look at each individual bank and their policy around how they'll look at your situation. And what we do as brokers, we'll sell your situation to the bank and say, look, it's no problem just using the last 12 months. And sometimes you have to use BASs, for this new financial year just to prove that the revenue's continuing or the turnover and that the business is doing even better. But yeah, I think that's where a great broker will just guide you on that. It's an interesting time of year to be thinking about it as well, because it's in June and accountants will be looking at it and going, hey, I want to show value. I want to reduce your tax. And we'll always be saying, hey, there's a consequence of maybe showing less profit and, et cetera here. And, sometimes it's a situation where you are just going, well, I'll just, make sure I get all my bills brought in, I'll get all my revenue as much as I can this year. So my income's looking as strong as possible between, this financial year, so I can borrow, so I can buy a home. And while that might mean you pay a bit more tax, it might allow you to go and, buy investments, which will offset that tax. So yeah, but just be really careful. Also, waiting another 2 months till you think about this, you might have missed the opportunity of just at this time of year.
It's like that old joke, isn't it? Have you had a good year in business? Well, it depends who's asking, because there's always that constant tension between trying to keep your tax bill managed and under control. But if you're looking to, let's say, buy a house or upgrade, well, you want to show a good, good strong few months of payslips or maybe a good tax return. And as you said, there's a very much a changing landscape, which is why I always use a broker. I think the days of low doc loans have really, there's just not that much of it these days. But there's, as you said, there's other sort of lenders that have, different policies for self-employment. And it's you really need someone who's across it because it's changing all the time. And some people use payslips, some people use, buzz returns, tax returns. It really depends on the lender and the product. Let's do one more from commercial. I want to buy commercial property for passive income, but I'm perhaps up to 10 years or so from retirement. I could afford to buy for cash, but I feel like I'd be wasting an opportunity to use some leverage. Do I use a 30% deposit, a 50% deposit, or do I just buy for cash? There's not really a right or wrong answer to that. I mean, I suppose the advantage of using some leverage is that the return on investment, the ROI, would go up typically because you're sort of magnifying the returns. The capital that you're putting down you're not putting as much in yourself. I think, yes, leverage, if it's well managed, can obviously magnify the returns. I think what would be sort of typical in that situation, as you say, Chris, there is a tax implication, but also if you're looking to sort of generate a passive income when it comes to retirement, this is really a run the numbers scenario. It probably makes sense to maybe use some leverage, but have the rental income pay down the debt potentially over that next decade. So that when you do pull up stumps on work, then you've got an unencumbered asset for the retirement phase. And that might mean using, as you say, 50% leverage or something like that. But it very much depends on the asset you're buying, what the net yield is, what kind of mortgage rate you're going to pay. But I guess, look, if it was me, that's probably how I'd set it up. I'd probably aim to use some leverage, but have it paid off by the time you look to sort of move into that retirement phase. What do you reckon?
Yeah, look, some commercial, and depending on what you're buying, different banks will give you different LVRs. I think you just got to be really careful, buying any investment with cash, is because the opportunity to have a tax deductible debt on that property is when you purchase it, right? And so you can't really change your mind. You can't really say, hang on a sec, I bought it all with cash and now I want to put debt on it. It just doesn't work like that. What the ATO will look at is say, how did you buy this property? Did you use cash or did you use debt? And if you used cash, well, you got no deduction. If you've used debt, there's a potential tax deductible interest there. So just be really careful getting it wrong. I'd always usually suggest you go on the other option first. Consider using leverage first. And then once you've made a decision that you've got no other better use for that money, then you can pay that property off because it makes sense. Whether it's, you might want to have your home paid off. You might want to put more money into super. You might want to, pay off your, residential properties. There's lots of different options. You might want to put money into shares rather than, paying off a commercial property. Interest rates are always changing, etc. So just be really careful You do need to get advice on this, I believe. I think from an accountant and also a planner to think through, well, what's the best use of your cash flow and your cash between now and retirement and ongoing? But just be really careful, just making just a finger in the air decision here and just picking, I've got heaps of cash right now, I'll just buy it with no debt, because you might regret that decision. And if you are going to hold assets long term, how you structure your assets in terms of if they're leveraged or they're not has a huge impact on your returns and the opportunity cost you could have done with that money if you did other things with it.
Yeah, that's very good advice, actually. I think you're right. If you use the leverage first, then you've got the opportunity to get some tax deductions. But if you do it the other way around, you're kind of limiting your choices. But as you said, speak to an advisor on that one so you can get the structure and the setup and the financing right. I think that's it for this week. So send in your questions. We'll cover anything you want us to over the next few weeks. So Chris, what's up for you this weekend?
Just vivid, mate. And, play football. I haven't played for a few weeks, so I'm absolutely dying. There was too much rain in April in Sydney. And so hopefully get to have a bit of a run around the park. What are you up to, mate? You obviously got the test next week. Anything else happening in the UK?
Isn't it? Yeah, every time I tune in to watch the rugby league or whatever is on, it's just rain. There's been so much rain this year. So I'm doing a bit of a tour of duty. So I'm going over to Leeds, newly promoted to the Premier League, just to catch up with a few expat mates from New Zealand and elsewhere. And then, down to London to see a few Aussies for the Lord's Test. So, hopefully they'll bring home the World Championship of Test cricket or whatever they call it. So, be a good day out. I love going down to Lord's. So, looking forward to that and hopefully catch up with the old man as well. So that's it. So have a cracking weekend, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. And as I say, send in your questions, or if you want to have a chat, just drop us a note. And we look forward to seeing you next week.
Talk next week. Thanks, Pete.
Thanks for watching this video on the Rask Network. While you're here, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can get videos each and every day on business, finance, investing, and so much more.